I remember the night my father pulled me onto the back porch and asked if I was sure. It was after the toasts, after the handshakes. The porch light threw a warm circle onto the steps, and beyond it the yard fell into that soft Midwestern dark that smells like cut grass and rain. He kept his voice low. He always did when the stakes were high. "Are you sure about this man?" he asked. About his mother? He didn't say it like an accusation. He said it like a man trying not to disturb a fragile thing he loves. I told him yes. I said my husband-to-be respected me, that love mattered more than bank balances, that not everyone grew up in a house like ours. My mother had been gone a few years by then. After she died, my father and I learned to speak in practicalities. He taught me the shape of a budget the way other fathers teach jump shots. He built his money from nothing and never made it anyone else's burden. He nodded, but his eyes stayed on mine. "I don't care where he comes from," he said. "I care what he notices. He notices money. So does his mother. That kind of hunger can swallow a home." I laughed the way people laugh when they're afraid. He touched my shoulder, let it go, and changed the subject. Inside, people were clinking glasses. My fiancé, my husband now, was telling a story loud enough to be heard over the music, his mother's bracelets flashing while she agreed with him. One day, he liked to say, "We'll live like your dad. Imagine the space, the cars, the trips." He meant it as a joke. I told myself he meant it as a joke. Looking back, that was the first crack. I bought my townhome with a down payment my father helped with. It wasn't big. It was what I could carry on my salary at the clinic. The kitchen window overlooked a parking lot and a maple that turned copper in October. When my husband and his mother moved in after the wedding, just until we figured something bigger out, they walked through the rooms with the bright curiosity of people touring a model home that didn't measure up. "Your father's house has 6 bedrooms, his mother said once, setting a crystal candle on my laminate counter. "It's such a waste, a house like that for one man." "He earned that quiet," I said. "Let him keep it." She smiled like she hadn't heard me. My father's decline happened quietly, too. The hospital lights were too white, the coffee too thin. I sat with him in the evenings while the machines breathed patience into the room. Sometimes we didn't talk at all. Sometimes we remembered my mother, her habit of putting a hand on the doorframe when she was thinking, the way she hummed when she folded towels. He made me promise to keep living soft where I could and firm where I must. I told him I would. When he died, the house felt wrong. The porch light glowed like an eye that wouldn't close. My husband told me the timing of the will reading mattered. His mother told me funerals were for people who needed the performance. They both stayed home. Later that week, at the little law office off River Street, the lawyer spoke in careful paragraphs. He said my father had chosen stability over spectacle. He said there would be no cash. He said there were properties, workaday duplexes that held the quiet lives of people who came home tired and paid on time, held in a trust with a manager who knew every leaky faucet by name. He said there was a 1-year waiting period, written that way for reasons that became clear to me in the months that followed. When I left the office, it was snowing the way it sometimes does here, small, stubborn flakes that don't stick, they just insist. I sat in my car and didn't turn the key. I listened to the cold tick against the windshield and thought about the way my father had looked at me on the porch, not doubtful, not scolding, just seeing me clearly and wishing the same for me. That night, my husband asked what I got. He didn't ask how I was. His mother leaned against the doorway and asked if I planned to trade my townhome for space that respected our status. I told them there was no money. That was true. I told myself the rest could wait. Later that night, I decided I was done being silent. The days after my father's funeral blurred into a kind of gray noise. Grief makes time sound different, slower, heavier. At work, I nodded through meetings I couldn't remember later. At home, the walls echoed with my husband's mother's phone calls and the constant rustle of catalogs she couldn't afford. Caleb started coming home later, carrying irritation like a briefcase. If dinner wasn't warm enough, he'd sigh, not angrily, just performatively, as if the sigh itself was proof he deserved more. Marla, his mother, filled the silence for him. Your father had taste, she said one night while setting her wine glass down too hard. He must have left you something fine. A daughter should be provided for, especially one who's been generous to her husband's family. I looked at her across the table. He left memories, I said. She gave me a small, polite smile. Memories don't pay mortgages, dear. They began asking more directly after that. First politely, then persistently. Had the will been read? Was there trust? Surely my father wouldn't forget his only child. Their questions came wrapped in concern, but the undertone was hunger. Every night it grew louder. Little comments about how unfair life can be and how the rich always find a way to stay comfortable. One evening, I came home from work and found Marla rearranging my father's old photographs on the mantel. She had replaced one of my parents together with a framed picture of Caleb and me from the wedding. This one fits the room better, she said. Brings in hope. Hope. I couldn't remember the last time that word felt honest. A week later, they cornered me again, both of them, sitting across from me on the couch like an interview panel. Caleb's tone was careful, too careful. So, honey, he said, Mom and I were wondering. It's been a while since the will reading. When does the inheritance come through? I told him I hadn't received anything, that the will mentioned no money, that what my father had was gone, donated, settled, finished. Marla laughed. Gone where? Your father wasn't a fool. Caleb's jaw tightened. You're lying, he said flatly. It wasn't the word that hurt. It was how easily it came out of him, as if honesty was an inconvenience. I stayed calm. You can look at my accounts, I said quietly. In a few days, when the paperwork clears. They did. And when they found nothing, their patience shattered. Caleb's affection shrank to nothing. No more late-night talks. No more shared meals. He still wore his ring, but more like a prop than a promise. Marla began talking about fresh starts and smart choices. Once, I overheard her on the phone telling a friend, turns out, the poor girl isn't rich after all. Such a shame. That was the night something hardened in me. A month later, I printed my bank statements, stacked them neatly on the dining table, and waited for them to come home. When they did, I slid the pages across. Here, I said. You can see for yourselves. Marla flipped through them, unimpressed. Caleb just stared. So that's it, he said finally. All these years, and this is what I get. What do you get? The words tasted strange in my mouth. Was that what this marriage was about? He didn't answer. Marla did. Don't act naive, Nora. My son could have married anyone, but he chose you. We assumed you understood the trade. Security for security. I think I stopped hearing them after that. My pulse was too loud. Caleb leaned back, rubbed his face. This is ridiculous, he muttered. 5 years wasted. There it was, the truth spoken without shame. The sound of a heart closing for good. I stood up. My voice didn't rise. Then it settled, I said. You'll have your freedom. I'll have mine. Marla blinked. You're agreeing to a divorce? Yes. Mutual, no claims. You keep what's yours, I'll keep what's mine. She smiled like a cat that finally caught the bird. Smart girl. But in my father's eyes, somewhere deep in memory, I could almost see him nodding, not out of sadness, but quiet pride. He'd warned me once that hunger can swallow a home. I just hadn't realized it could swallow love too. That night, I signed the papers. I didn't cry, not then. I saved my tears for the car, the one place left where I could still be alone with the truth. And sitting there, staring at the dashboard light, I understood. Some endings don't explode. They just exhale. The morning after I signed the divorce papers, the house felt too clean. 2 coffee mugs sat untouched on the counter. One of them his, still rimmed with a faint stain of someone who never rinsed things properly. I didn't move them. Not out of sentiment, but because silence deserves its own space before you fill it again. I kept going to work. That was my refuge, the steady rhythm of charts, patient calls, the whir of the copier. It helped to have a place where no one knew that my life had collapsed quietly over the weekend. At lunch, I'd sit in my car and cry until the tears ran out, then powder my face and return to the world. There's a strange dignity in breaking down privately, a kind of defiance that says, "You won't get my ruin." 2. At home, the house settled differently now that Caleb and Marla were gone. No perfume trailing down the hallway, no television droning on at midnight. Just the creak of floorboards and the hum of the refrigerator. It was loneliness, yes, but also peace. Every night, I'd replay the last few years like scenes from a film I couldn't believe I'd starred in. The subtle digs. The shopping trips for us that drained my savings. The way Caleb once smiled when my father coughed too long at dinner, a flash of calculation I'd mistaken for concern. And my father's voice echoing back, steady and sad. He notices money. I had noticed too, just too late. Weeks passed, and grief changed shape. It stopped being sharp and became heavy, like carrying water in both hands, knowing you'll spill some no matter how careful you are. One evening after work, I drove to the old house, my father's mansion. It stood quiet, shutters drawn, the porch light still timed to come on at dusk. I sat in the driveway, engine off, and whispered, "I did what you told me, Dad." I stayed firm. The air smelled like rain on stone. For the first time in months, I felt something close to steadiness. When I returned home, there was a letter waiting in my mailbox. The envelope was thick, formal, from the law firm that had handled my father's estate. Inside, a short note. Subject: Transfer confirmation. The 1-year evaluation period concludes next week. Please contact the property manager to arrange title transfer. I read it 3 times. The words didn't quite register. Evaluation period. Title transfer. And then it clicked. My father hadn't left cash. He'd left legacy, measured in deeds, not dollars. He hadn't just protected me from greed. He'd given me time to see it clearly. The next few days moved with quiet precision. I met with the estate manager, a kind, steady man who'd worked with my father for years. He smiled when he saw me. "Your dad was proud of you," he said simply. "Said you had more sense than you realized." He slid a folder across the table. Inside were documents detailing the properties, rows of duplexes and small homes in Riverton, including the very block where my husband and mother-in-law had rented their new place. "Wait," I said slowly. "This neighborhood?" He nodded. "All of it. It's yours now." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. The irony was almost too sharp. They'd left me over what they thought I didn't have, only to end up living on what I did. I left the office in a daze, the folder pressed against my chest like a secret I wasn't ready to share. Driving home, I rolled down the window. The cold air stung, but it felt cleansing, like something in me was finally exhaling after a long, careful hold. That night, I made tea, sat by the window, and let myself imagine a life where peace wasn't borrowed. No one asking for proof, no one measuring love by numbers. Just me and the quiet hum of a house that finally felt like mine again. Still, part of me hesitated to act. Old habits die slow, the habit of explaining, apologizing, shrinking to fit someone else's comfort. But the more I sat with the truth, the clearer it became. Silence isn't always peace. Sometimes it's preparation. And I was done preparing. I was ready. That was the week I decided to pay them a visit, not out of revenge, but out of closure. They deserved to hear the truth, and I deserved to speak it. Later that night, as I folded the legal documents back into the folder, I whispered again to the empty room. "Dad, you were right about them. But you were also right about me. I finally see it now." A week later, the transfer was finalized. My name sat inked across every deed, black on white, absolute. The estate manager congratulated me and asked if I wanted him to inform the tenants. I said no. Some truths are best delivered in person. That evening, I drove to the small cul-de-sac where Caleb and Marla had rented their duplex. It was one of my father's quietest properties, neat lawns, cracked sidewalks, the smell of fresh-cut grass. Their porch light flickered weakly. Marla opened the door first, wearing a robe that looked expensive, but wasn't. Her eyes widened when she saw me standing there, calm and dry-eyed, holding a small velvet box. "Well," she said, tightening the robe, "if it isn't the poor heiress. What brings you here? Need to borrow sugar or a spine?" Her laugh was brittle. Caleb appeared behind her, expression wary, like a man expecting a scene. I came to return something, I said. I held out the box. The rings. I'd rather not keep reminders of a mistake. Caleb frowned. You could use the money.
Pawn them.
They're cheap, but still something. Marla snorted. Yes, take the petty cash, Nora. Heaven knows your little job doesn't pay much. For a heartbeat, I just looked at them, really looked. The same two people who once slept under my roof, ate my father's meals, called me family. And now, stripped of affection, they looked smaller somehow. Ordinary. Then I smiled. You're right, I said softly. My job doesn't pay much. But I don't need the money. Marla tilted her head. Of course you do. You're destitute. Your parents ruined you by not leaving anything. I let out a quiet laugh. That's the funny part. I never said my parents didn't leave me an inheritance. I said they didn't leave me money. Caleb blinked. What are you talking about? My father left me something else, something he trusted me to manage when the time was right. Turns out, that time is now. They both stared at me, confused. I nodded toward the walls around them. This neighborhood, I said evenly. Every house, every unit. It's mine now. The silence that followed was almost holy. Marla's mouth fell open. You're lying. We signed a lease with an estate manager. The owner was someone else. That was temporary, I said. My father arranged it that way, to test whether love could outlast greed. It didn't. Caleb's face drained of color. You let us think you were broke. I told you the truth, I said. I had no money. I just didn't tell you about the deeds waiting in trust. Marla's voice rose, cracking. You tricked us. You let my son throw his life away for nothing. I met her fury with calm. Your son threw away a marriage for money that wasn't his. The difference matters. She turned on Caleb. Call the landlord. Prove she's lying. He did. Right there on speaker, his hand shaking. The estate manager's voice came through, polite but firm. Yes, Mr. Ward, the properties have been transferred to Mrs. Nora Ellison. She is your landlord now. Caleb ended the call slowly, staring at the floor. Marla just sank into the couch like someone hit by wind. So, I said quietly, when your lease renews next month, I'll expect you to vacate. I'm not cruel, I'll give you proper notice. But you'll need to find somewhere else to play rich. Caleb looked up, eyes wild. We can fix this. We were married, Nora. We can try again. You don't have to. I cut him off gently. You made it clear what mattered to you, Caleb. You don't want me. You want what I have. And now you can have neither. Marla stood suddenly, voice trembling. If you evict us, we'll have nowhere to go. You had a home once, I said. You left it when you thought I wasn't enough. Her mouth opened, then closed again. There was nothing left to say. I turned to leave, the night air cold against my face. Caleb followed me to the door. Nora, wait please. I paused on the porch, hand on the railing. You once told me love was supposed to be a partnership, I said. Turns out you were right. My father built something to last. You just didn't know I was the one holding the key. I walked down the steps before he could answer. Behind me, Marla's voice rose, sharp and panicked, but it faded as I reached the car. When I started the engine, my hands were steady. For the first time in years, I wasn't the one explaining myself. That night, back in my own house, I placed the velvet ring box on the counter and turned off every light except one. Outside, the maple tree swayed under the street lamp, its leaves gold and tired. I watched it move and felt something inside me settle. Not triumph, not vengeance. Just relief. My father's voice seemed to echo through the stillness. Be firm where you must. And I finally understood what he meant. A few weeks later, the formal notices went out, printed on soft ivory paper, sealed, and hand-delivered by the property manager. Caleb and Marla had 30 days to vacate. I half expected another confrontation, but for a while, they stayed silent. Maybe pride held them in place, or disbelief. Either way, I was fine with the quiet. During that time, I kept my routines simple. work, groceries, evening walks through the very neighborhood I now owned. The tenants, people I'd never really known before, waved when they saw me. A young couple with a baby. An older man who trimmed every lawn like it was his own. It struck me then this is what my father meant by legacy. Not marble floors or gated drives, but lives that continue quietly, decently, because someone cared enough to build stability for others. I'd grown up around wealth, but never understood its weight until I carried it in my own hands. Money can build walls. But the right kind of wealth, the kind earned, held with purpose, can make space instead. Of course, silence never lasts forever. On the 23rd day, I heard a pounding at my door. Marla. Her lipstick was smudged, her eyes furious and pleading all at once. Please, she said before I could speak. We've been blacklisted from other rentals. No one will take us. Just let us stay. We'll pay extra. We'll. Her voice cracked. The edges of her arrogance had worn thin. I stepped outside, closing the door softly behind me. Marla, I said, I'm not your enemy. But you made choices, both of you did. Choices that came from greed, not need. She started to cry. Not pretty tears, the kind that come from realizing the game's over. Caleb stood a few feet away on the sidewalk, hands buried in his pockets, avoiding my eyes. For the first time, he looked young. Small. Lost. I loved you, you know, he said quietly. I almost believed him. But love without respect is just possession. I know, I said. You loved what I represented. That's not the same thing. He nodded, eyes wet. So this is really it? Yes. No anger. No shouting. Just truth. When they left, I stood on the porch until their car disappeared down the street. I didn't feel triumph, only stillness, the kind that comes after a long, exhausting storm. In the following days, word spread. People talk in towns like Riverton. The story twisted through streets and coffee shops. The girl who lost everything, then quietly owned it all. I didn't correct anyone. The truth didn't need to travel fast anymore. One evening, I stopped by the old mansion. The new tenants had moved in, a family with 2 kids and a dog that barked at its own tail. I smiled watching them through the fence, then left a small bouquet on the porch rail. In the fading light, I could almost hear my father's voice again. Be firm where you must. Be soft where you can. Now, when I tell the story, when people ask how I survived betrayal, loss, and everything in between, I tell them this. Some endings aren't punishments. They're permissions. Losing people who only wanted your shine means you finally get to live in your own light. That's what my father gave me, not money, but the freedom to stand without apology. That night, I sat by the window again with a cup of tea, the steam curling toward the quiet. Outside, the wind moved through the maple tree, patient, steady, unafraid of change. And I realized something simple, almost gentle. Sometimes, the best revenge is peace that no one else can touch. Thank you for walking this path with me. Every story reminds us that strength often hides behind heartbreak. If this one touched you, stay with us, where every story reveals another truth of the human heart. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share, so more stories like this can find the people who need them most.